And welcome to Civil Discourse. I'm Jayme Marilyn.
And I'm Marilyn Brown.
And today we are discussing having a mindful perspective on current events. So, I guess what has just been on your mind a lot has happened in the past week since the Charlottesville and things specifically corresponding to that and things that are completely different topics, but it's just been I feel like a lot has happened.
Yes, definitely. A lot has happened, and I think it's been so much that we kind of struggle to figure out what specifically to focus on because there's been a lot that's happened and kind of feeling very pulled. I know I've been feeling very pulled in a lot of different directions. But one thing that I've really been thinking a lot about is how the nation has been responding to the violence in Charlottesville and responding in terms of how they're dealing with Confederate monuments. Um, and so that's been really interesting to me because that was kind of one of the one of the catalysts or one of the issues that brought people to Charlottesville was defending that this statue of Robert E. Lee was going to be taken down. And so this had already been planned. And what I'm seeing and what I've been reading about is that a lot of people in different cities have been voting on it. Different states, different municipalities have been voting and saying, yeah, we do want these taken down. And so one thing that's been coming up for me is how do we mindfully deal with it? How do we mindfully move forward and help this not become something that later is a bigger part of kind of that rewriting history narrative or that kind of that not being mindful and being aware that we've struggled with in the past. And so that's really been coming up for me. And I've been hearing a lot of different ideas of kind of how to handle it, if it's okay to take them down in the first place, and also how do we respond? What do we do? Um, so that's been on my mind a lot. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts about that topic?
Uh, I do. It's hard because I feel like there's so many. It's such a complex issue that it's hard to wrap your mind around it in a mindful way, almost.
Hmm.
Because I think both sides of the argument. I don't want to say that I think they're valid, but I see where both sides are coming from, and when I'm saying that they should be brought down versus the this is our history. And I think if those are the two arguments, one, we need to be having a more mindful argument on what that means. But I also think the history of it is important, and I think if your argument is the history, then you should know the history. And the reality of it is most of those monuments were mass produced for a very specific reason. If you look at when
Yeah.
they were put up during two very specific periods when Jim Crow laws were being implemented and during the civil rights movement.
Yep.
And there's been a lot of talk about, well, we should move them to museums, and then I'm also mixed on that because they're mass produced.
Mhm.
I feel comfortable saying propaganda in a way because that's what the intent of them was. Now,
Yes.
what they have morphed into, that could be something different if they have meaning for different people now. But the intention of it was that, and they're not. You saw I saw the footage of the, was it Antifa protesters who brought the one monument down.
They weren't Antifa. I mean, there may have been like one or two people sprinkled in there, but it was kind of a mixture of
Right.
people. Like it wasn't one organization that got together and did it. It was like a mixture of frustrated activists.
Right.
Um,
And the
yeah.
point is, anyways, is when that statue came down, it crumbled like it was paper. Because these are just like very hollow metal things that weren't there. It to me, if you're going to talk about monuments, monuments are art pieces in a way. They're supposed to have meaning and there's supposed to be thought behind them, and and to just be not that is, yeah, it's hard for me because I understand that it's a complex issue, but I think a lot of people don't understand the history to be able to have a meaningful conversation about it.
Yeah, I think you're spot on that people really, really need to have a better understanding of the history, because I think that for people who see these as a symbol of their history and of their heritage, it does feel like something is being taken away. But it's important to learn where that came from and to learn the context. And so I don't really know, how we do this. I don't know if in every city that they take one down, that they also like have, a history lesson or something that people can participate in. But I feel like it's important to educate. And so I actually I like the idea of museums, not for all of them, because I definitely, I wasn't as aware about the mass production, but that makes a lot of sense to me. These aren't really, monuments that were built to last. These were like propaganda and intimidation pieces. And so, they're pretty cheaply made. But I do think that on a larger scale, having or bringing them into museums, or having specific museums that can talk about where they actually came from. That point about when most of them were erected being during the civil rights movement and during Jim Crow era is so important. And I don't think a lot of people know that. I know that I didn't know that until recently when I started looking up information about this, and so even in the last week or so, a lot of them have been coming down in cities pretty quietly at night. I know there was one in the state of California at Hollywood Forever Cemetery, and that one's been like taken down and stored away somewhere. They're going to decide what to do with it. But so I think that, and I think that's important. I think that paying attention to the fact that these are symbols of intimidation, that these were put up for a reason, and to intimidate a specific population of citizens is really an important thing. And so I feel like when you're able to look at all of that and be aware of all that, then the mindful response is to say, well, yeah, of course, take them down. These people who these were put here to scare and to hurt and to make feel unsafe in their own home, even though they're being given more rights, and fighting for more rights and dying for more rights. And so I think that that's a very important point, and I think that if people have the education and understanding, then you'll find more people saying, okay, yeah, that makes more sense to me. I see why these are harmful. And especially in the climate that we're in right now, I think people are really kind of waking up and saying, okay, I see how this really can be harmful. These are not just, these aren't just, harmful, benign things to people who this matters to. It really, really can intimidate you. I heard a college student talking about how it felt to go on campus every day and like feel, have this like Confederate general statue like looking down on you every day, while you're trying to get an education. And so, I think all of that is important. And it really reminds me of in college, I went to University of Illinois during the time when we had the Chief Illiniwek as our mascot. And then during the time that I was there were huge protests and a lot of controversy around it. And they got rid of the chief and just have now the black eye mascot. And so watching that, I remember when I first got to campus, I didn't understand why it was such a big deal, to be honest. I was kind of like, well, it's harmless. It's not bothering anybody. You know what I mean? That kind of thing. Like I was just, I didn't see the harm until I started going to meetings and hearing the people in the Native American community saying, this is offensive. This is harmful to me. Maybe you don't see the harm, but this harms me. And so then kind of the university as a whole taking that on and making the shift. And I think that that's important. We have to find a way to be mindful and compassionate to everyone's experiences.
Yeah, and I think that for me is the problem, and I see it here. I see it. It's really just the way. I don't know if it's always been like this or if it's just where we're at. You see it with healthcare. You see it with other things where there's two clear sides,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah.
but there's no mindful. I guess. Do I want to use the word compromise? And then I'll give an example. Like what would feel I think more mindful for me is to accept everyone's experience as if there wasn't as much talk of just bringing the statues down, but also a discussion on what to replace them with. So, and I think, I mean, there'll still be people outraged, but I think there would be more success and less fighting if it was we acknowledge that the history, the idea of the history, or like feeling American or whatever this represents, whether it's accurate or not, that feeling exists. And I think we'd be more successful if it wasn't just we want to take all these statues down, as opposed to we want to replace it with something that actually does what you want,
Right.
without having the negative side effects of
Right.
it. And yeah, people will still be outraged because not everyone is mindful enough to see that. But I think I do think you'd have a better. Yeah, I don't want to say anything
Mhm.
else. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. No, I see what you're saying, and I think that could definitely go a long way in being helpful to the conversation, having some sort of solution, having a replacement, having something that does actually represent our shared kind of collective history in this country. Though I did see a petition out there to replace one of them with Missy Elliott's statue. So I don't know.
I support that.
I was like, that'd be dope. I mean, it's very meaningful. Like she means a lot to the culture, the music. Like I'd be down for that. But no, but I think thinking about something that is again not there to intimidate, but is there to kind of connect people. I think it would be important. But I don't even feel like you get to that point in the conversation a lot of times with people. I
Right.
think that there's just that immediate like initial defensive reaction of like I'm not okay with this that you get, and so it's hard to even kind of have a conversation about like what to replace it with. And I think that for a lot of people who these are symbols of racism for them, and of white supremacy, and of this kind of idea that like even though things are changing and our country's becoming more diverse, you're still in charge. You know what I mean? That kind of that shared connection for that. And so I don't think there's really anything that's going to feel, okay. But I do
Right.
think that, replacing them with statues of women and people of color who have done significant things in the country, or, things like that would be, um, I don't know. I don't know. I don't even know if I really feel like they need to be replaced, though. I just feel like rather than, because it's propaganda, and it's like,
Right.
I replace propaganda with more propaganda. Maybe just replace it with like the fact that we're going to try to be more honest about what's actually happening.
Yeah, I think what also happens too, and this may be the ego of why I'm saying replace, is when people are forced to be mindful in that context. A lot of times they are not able to hide as easily, and I think we see a lot of the well, it's my history, the pride thing is actually just an excuse, whether that's conscious or subconscious. And as soon as you bring in that, well, we can replace it with, if the thing we want to replace, this is just an example, is with diversity, and we could do Martin Luther King working with the people he worked with, and it could be monuments to people working together. You would very quickly see who actually believed in the rhetoric they were spewing, and who it was just rhetoric to try to halt
Hmm.
something from happening.
Right, right. To try to stop that progress and that change. Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's true. It does help kind of separate, you know, people's intentions a little bit more, because you're acknowledging and you're validating, okay, I recognize that this is important to you, so this is what we're going to do. This is how we're, and so it's that taking that mindful approach, that how they feel matters, and
Mm-hmm.
being open, and being willing to acknowledge that, and find some way to work with that.
Yeah, and I think too that when it's not mindful, you get into the I guess your side's mentality, and then that's it. And then neither side is productive because nothing you say holds weight. Like as soon as, for example, as soon as I hear, well, where's it going to end? Are you going to strip statues of George Washington and all these things? And it's just not a valid argument to me
Right.
because it's a talking point. It's
Right.
kind of
It's
a
not like
gotcha
underachieve.
type
You
thing.
know.
And I'm like, that's not. So no one who disagrees with that is going to take that argument seriously. So then you're basically just convincing people who are already on your side,
Hmm.
and that's it. So it becomes kind of this internalized thing, and you have no reach outside of yourself to not just convince, but to be mindful. And because mindfulness is a two-way street, right? you
Right.
need
Exactly.
you need to be mindful of others and compassionate and empathetic, but you need that process in return too for the engagement to truly be mindful. And we live in a society where neither side of that really happens very often.
Yeah. Yeah. It's definitely a challenge, and I think actually going on to a different current event that this makes me think about is this last couple of weeks or so I've been seeing a lot more about Colin Kaepernick and his protest that he started last year during the 2016 um, NFL season, where he took a knee silently in protest of police brutality and in support of Black Lives Matter. And since then, it's just been interesting kind of seeing how this is coming up more, because it was kind of quiet for the last few months. Football season's been over. People haven't really been talking about it. But meanwhile, he's continuing to not get signed. And so now it's become there's kind of this movement starting to build around um, acknowledging or pointing out the discrepancies in how he's being treated by the NFL, and or what the response has been to his protests versus what happens when other players, have other behaviors or things happen. So that's been really, really interesting to me. And that's another one of those discussions where I see very, very polarized sides
Mm-hmm.
about it. You either hear people like, how dare he? You have to defend the flag. That was just wrong. And that he should, that he shouldn't have done that. And then you have the other side that people are very adamant that it's completely his right to do that, and supporting him in that. And I feel like there's not a lot of kind of discussion in between. So I was wondering what some of your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me just because I do have such a strong opinion on it.
Hmm.
So I just one I don't I understand that I do understand people who find that action offensive. I completely disagree with finding it offensive because it's peaceful. He took a knee in silence. So to me, like all those actions are are respectful. They're
Totally.
not like I don't nothing in my being sees anything he's doing as disrespectful. I actually see it him going out of his way to protest in the most respectful way possible.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, especially with everything that happened in Charlottesville, is you see how polarizing it is and how unmindful it is when the same people who find him totally offensive are the same people who are defending people marching with torches and stuff. And
Right.
even if you think you have the Trump mentality that there were some people who were just there to because they cared
Yeah.
about the statue or
Yeah.
whatnot. I just don't see how that would not outrage you while him taking a knee peacefully would. There's a cognitive dissonance
Huge.
there
Yeah.
in my opinion, because even with Charlottesville, even though I disagree with protesting the removal of the statue, if that's truly what it was and people just went there peacefully to state why the statue was important to them without tiki torches, without violence, without hate speech,
Mhm.
I would have supported their right to do that.
Yeah.
But one, that's not what happened, and then to think that what happened is somehow better or acceptable when someone doing the same thing very peacefully,
Hmm.
without hate, without violence, without tiki torches.
Right.
Um, it just,
And
yeah,
yeah. And
it's hard. It's
also,
just so unmindful that I don't even know how to tackle it.
it is. Yeah, no, this is one that I think really shows the severe cognitive dissonance that's kind of going on right now. And I think it is, if you can kind of mindfully pull back and look at it, it's a little mind blowing. It's like what you people talk about free speech. A lot of right wing people really advocate for free speech, and so it, he's using a perfect example of free speech, and very peacefully doing it. And I think doing it in such a mindful way that rather than him, I mean, he talked about it at a couple press conferences and why he was doing it. And he's, made his pledge to give $1 million and to support different organizations, which he has been doing. He's continued with that and been really active in doing the work as well, but really quietly doing a lot of those things. And I think I really like how he's done it because it's really making people who are willing to actually pay attention because they're like, it doesn't make sense to people more and more. And so people start, I think, asking more questions and kind of getting more curious about, why this is the case.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, one thing that really, um, I guess one thing that really sticks out to me that's important is that, you know, the actions that he's taking and the work that he's doing to back it up is really like that's kind of what we talk about as far as being patriotic and American and really being showing those values that we really hold dear and that the NFL really loves to kind of say that the NFL is such a big part of American culture and there's it's kind of woven into that institution. And so it's interesting that when someone is very mindfully, very peacefully um, protesting that's the reaction. But I think that the cool thing that we're seeing now is that there's much more support that started to happen just as this season is starting. We're getting at the very beginning of preseason, and so I think it was the Cleveland Browns.
Mm-hmm.
They said 10 players knelt from the Cleveland Browns, and there was the first white player that knelt from that team, and he said, my wife is black, and so my children are going to grow up experiencing a different um, a different world than I have, and I'm concerned about that, and so it's important for me to do that. And I think that the more work he continues to do, the more to kind of highlight the severe problems, I think the more support he's going to get. And it's going to be interesting for me to kind of see if there really is that also reaction of people really boycotting the NFL and not watching games and not buying merchandise. I mean, you're hearing, a lot of calls to completely not participate, which for me isn't a problem because I'm not an NFL watcher or anything. So
Me
my
either. So.
boycott, I don't spend any money on it anyway. But it'll be interesting to see how, if kind of how this progresses. I'm really
Mm-hmm.
curious because I think as it continues to grow and his methods of doing it really are going to continue to shine through as being a very mindful way um, to actually be an activist.
Right, and I think too, just as a counter argument, which is it's not really a counter argument, but when we're talking about free speech, right, you're not talking about freedom from consequences,
Mm-hmm,
and
mm-hmm,
I think I always come back on this one to the hypocrisy because I understand that the NFL is a private entity and has a brand, and if you're doing things that are against that brand, they have every right to fire you, to not hire you, to not reuse you. But it, it, there's red flags when that is not a consistent practice. And I hear a lot about, well, it needs to just be about football. Let's keep it about football. But then those same people are praising players who are taking time at the end to pray or kneeling and gesture. And I'm like, you're okay with that because you agree with it. But
Right.
that's not about football. So it would be then you firing any player that does anything on the field that's not directly related to football.
Right.
Or that I've heard arguments about, well, he's not getting picked up for that, and there's players who have criminal records and records of abusing their spouse, of rape, of all these things, and there's no consequences for them. Sometimes there are, but I mean, they're still
Yeah.
being brought on, and someone who kneels peacefully isn't. So for me, I totally understand that the branding element of it's a company, and if you're doing things that are against the brand, then you're not in alignment with that company. But if you're going to actually use that as a defense, you need to be consistent in those practices and own up to it, because then people can decide if they want to engage, if they want to buy your brand based on what that brand is. And if your brand is going to be, there's no politics involved, then people who think that there should are probably going to leave. And you have to be okay with that, because that's your brand. That's how it works.
Right. Yeah, no, I think I agree with all of that. And I think that, one thing that really sticks out to me, and there's no answer for it because we can't give an answer for a speculation, but I'm just really curious to see if the response would have been different if he were kneeling about, I don't know, healthcare or something like that, where it wasn't specifically in support for Black lives. I'm curious, if it was okay, well, he's doing this, and if it would have been ignored, or if there still would have been the same response of, well, it's not okay to do this. Like, I'm just curious. And again, we'll never know.
Yeah.
But I just wonder, because for me, I can be honest that viscerally, I really think a lot of it just has to do with the fact that he's standing up for Black people. And that is very offensive to a certain group.
Well, yeah, I think too. I mean, it's speculation, obviously, but part of me does feel like the outrage would have been there no matter what, just because of two reasons. One, he's Black, and two,
yeah, true.
It's just we're in such a polarized time that anything you would potentially protest, there's such strong polarization in all those things that I think there would have been a negative reaction. I mean, I think Black Lives Matter is more polarizing than healthcare, and I think
But no, I see what you're saying.
I can see both sides to it.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
I'm not very mindful because we don't know either way.
Right. And it's interesting too. Something else I wanted to point out, because I see a lot of this on social media and kind of just in activist groups, is there's this a lot of blame being placed on the media, and we've talked about all the issues we have with the media not being mindful, but the thing is too, I think there's a danger in placing so much blame on the media. And I'll give an example, and you may, if you haven't seen this, it's not really all that important, but I think the reaction to Tina Fey's sketch on Saturday Night Live wasn't, it became big in the news, but I think it's because people made it so big on social media. And most of what I saw was not coming from the news, was coming from social media. And I think it actually started with an article from The Roots. And I'm not sure if that's exactly, but that was the biggest article I saw being shared. And the thing about it was, I actually thought the article was very mindful. I think it pointed out the problems with the issue. And then what I was seeing was it was becoming very unmindful as it was being shared in the comments, in the way people were engaging with. And I think it was because there were, again, two sides to the argument. And whenever that happens, it becomes very polarizing. But yeah, it was something I want to point out because it became about my two reactions were I felt because it there were so distinct sides, it became such a big deal that people were focusing on, and my first instinct was, is this really the battle we're choosing to have for these 3 days is over Tina Fey? And then the other part was that I think the whole message of what the root of the problem uh, was missed by a lot of people.
Yeah,
Um,
by all
they
that back
did,
and forth.
yeah, and I think because the big argument, the heart of the argument, in a mindful way of what I took from it was that in satire, and we did a whole segment on satire, so all that applies to this. And I think specifically satire in general, specifically political satire right now, is very dominated by white people, and so I think the type of satire we see is very much through a white lens, if you
Oh,
will, and that's very much what Tina Fey did, and people attacked Tina Fey specifically for it. And I think my problem with that was that, and this comes from me, I think, also being an actor and
yeah,
being a comedian, is it 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 I want to choose my words carefully. I just feel like it's not my responsibility as one singular artist to be able to champion everything and be everything. So for me, the bigger problem was not with Tina Fey, because Tina Fey is a brand and did what she always does. If
hmm
I would have been shocked if she would have done anything else, because that's not who she is. And I think there would have been as much outrage if she, as a privileged white woman, tried to do satire from the perspective of a black woman or anyone that's
right,
not her. So
right,
for me, the bigger problem was, if you're demanding that there be more perspectives, that's an issue with SNL. SNL should have done more than one clip to show multiple perspectives. There should be more multiple perspectives in satire. I just feel like it's dangerous when we go after individuals, because one, I don't feel like it's their responsibility to do that, and two, I think it kind of it focuses on what the issue isn't. So then the issue is never focused on, and the people who actually have the power to make change in that arena are never the ones being challenged.
right. Yeah, no, I didn't see the whole thing. I saw little clips of it, but I like what you said about that. It's not their that you don't feel like it's one actor's responsibility to try to speak about something or create satire from a different perspective. And I think it can be kind of dangerous to even try to do that. I think when we put that responsibility on people, then that I feel like that would be an opportunity to be a lot more offensive than what she did, which sounds like she kind of stuck with her own brand and
Mm-hmm.
what she does, um, you know, and and created some satire. Like I didn't really, again, I avoided like reading the articles and think pieces about it, because I was just like, no, don't, why are we talking about this? Like I just kind of saw it as like, okay, that was her contribution to the conversation. She's
Right,
one
and
person. How what do you expect somebody to do? And again, I think that when we try to push people to try to to do it in a way that's not really authentic to them, then it's even worse or it's even more concerning. And so, yeah, I don't know. I think that we really have to um, be mindful about what we're asking of people. And I do think that there need to be more diverse voices. And I think a lot of people are
mm-hmm.
creating spaces for that and doing that. And we need that on the larger platforms, on SNL and things like that. But expecting one person to create that in one piece is just really not. It just doesn't
Yeah,
make sense to me. It's just not it's just not very realistic, and it's not very mindful.
yeah, and I think it's the habit we have to try to find the simplest answer instead of what's at the problem. Because what a lot I was seeing is a lot of debate was over what is the role of satire, and people trying to say, well, you just didn't understand it, and the other and other people think, well, I found it offensive, and that's all. Everyone feeling those ways is valid in
Totally.
my opinion, but I feel like the root and the reason I knew something was off, because what I was seeing a lot of people who felt offended by it were saying was that uh, they felt like the skit would have been okay if after she would have come out and acknowledged that it was a joke and then said, did you see the skit at all?
I saw what she was
Yeah,
doing. Saw like little clips of it.
right. So she basically was satirizing herself and
Yeah.
basically saying that she was going to buy a cake and yell into the cake and just ignore it and it'll go away. And whether you agree with that message or not, or if you think it was just satire and it wasn't meant to be that message, if it was, a lot of what I was saying is she should have come out afterwards. She should have either done a completely different skit, is what people were saying,
Mm-hmm.
that then wouldn't have been satire because it would have just been a skit
Her talking.
of what
Okay.
she thought she should do, or that she should do the satire and then afterwards say what she actually recommended. And for me, I'm just thinking, well, one, that's not her responsibility, and
Totally.
two, what's behind that thinking, and what's behind that thinking, what I've kind of trying to see it for what was behind it. And I mean, it could be, I'm not perfect, so it's not like I'm saying this is what people are thinking, but what it seemed like, trying to look at it mindfully, is that people wanted more perspectives, or that's what would fix it. If there would have been three or four skits about it with different perspectives, I don't, I, you wouldn't need then to come out and say what the, you wouldn't have to explain what it meant and what you really think afterwards, because you would have those diverse voices within satire. And I think that's, yeah.
What? I mean, I didn't read the responses, but that part really confuses me because it kind of sounds like people wanted just like they needed the satire kind of explained to that. Like I'm just kind of like,
Well,
how
I
would
mean, I
that
think it was, yeah, I
back
think it was,
if she like came out?
I don't want to oversimplify
Yeah,
simplify it
yeah,
either, because that wasn't the general out. I mean, I think it was very nuanced and people felt, had very individual reactions, and there was a lot of different things being said about it, about how it was really just perpetuating the problem, and she was just commenting on the problem without, and I mean, I agree with all these things. I'm not saying that the people who thought it was offensive are wrong by any
right,
means. I mean, we did a whole segment on it where basically I said a lot of things they said. I think the problem is satire is really just commenting on what people are already doing, and it's not bringing new ideas. It's just commenting, so you end up perpetuating the very things that you're criticizing, and that was the problem with it. It seemed like the problem a lot of people were having with it, and it was just interesting, I guess, stepping back away from it and seeing, well, that's the problem with all satire, really. And
right,
what's the actual solution? You either don't, like, Tina Fey is not the problem here. It's what satire is, how it's consumed, where it's at. And I don't
yeah,
think satire is always a problem. I think now, because it is very singular in the what it's commenting on the same news segments of everything, the same kind of people are sharing that perspective, that I think it's just very, it's not diverse enough to have a really meaningful positive effect,
right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah. No, I agree with that. And I think also it's timing. I think that I
Right.
wonder if people's reaction would have been as, visceral and as quick if this was like 6 months later and it wasn't right after, um, the violence and so many things that are going on. So I wonder if that was also just part of
Mm-hmm.
what really affected people was that the timing of the satire. It's easier to digest when we're a little bit further away from it. But when we're kind of in the midst of it and feeling conflicted, and I think there's a lot of people who want to help but don't know how to, don't know what to do, and kind of looking to media for answers, for help, and for kind of resources. And so it kind of sounds like people just felt like, well, that wasn't helpful. Like,
Mm-hmm.
and I could see that, because I do think that timing is important, but also satire, like you said, it satire never really goes away, and at certain times it's going to be more easily consumed than others.
Right, and the whole point of, I mean, I don't want to say the whole point, but a big point of political satire really is to numb the effect, to give kind of people relief from
Yeah.
it. And that does two things. It does give you the relief from being overwhelmed by it, but it also numbs you to it to a degree. So I think there'll always be that argument. And I think that's why it's so important to stay as mindful in the conversation as possible, because I think the conversation is very important. I mean, we did a whole segment on it,
Right.
but I think, yeah, I mean, like SNL, Tina Fey, they're smart. They knew there's gonna be backlash no matter what we do. There was gonna be backlash because of the timing. They made that choice. So that could be a separate conversation we have, but they knew the outrage was going to be there. So focusing it on them, I think doesn't hit the root of the problem at any point. I think it avoids what the root of the problem is. And to be mindful, I think we're most effective when we're trying to dive into that root or find where
Mm-hmm.
that root
Mm-hmm.
is. Because I mean, I think that's a thing we haven't really talked about before. Is it's just important to find it. You don't have to always know where the root of the problem is, but I think that journey of finding it, and I think a lot of people just want to find it as quickly as possible, so they look for the easiest thing and then they say that's the root of the problem. And
Mm-hmm.
it's very complex. It's a thing that is always changing because the time is changing, people are changing, interactions changing. So what is the root cause today could be a different root cause tomorrow. And I think it's about staying open. I didn't look at this and say, oh, there's the root cause. I really had to read a lot of things and see what people were saying and kind of detach. I didn't engage in any of the conversations at
Mm-hmm.
all.
Yeah.
And which is rare for me, because normally it's a little easier for me to
Clear.
find the the root, because we're debating issues that have been around a while and I've had the time to kind of digest them and things like that. But this was kind of a thing that just kind of popped up. So I
Yeah.
really had to step back and just see what was happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Which, being mindful to recognize that having that awareness that needs to happen, is
Right.
important. And so I think that's kind of cycling back to, like, we've got to do that mindful work for ourselves so that we can recognize, like, I need to look deeper.
Right.
I can't take the easy route of just, that's what it is, and accepting that, but I've got to be willing to, like, dig in, and be willing to find something that doesn't feel good for me, something that makes me uncomfortable.
Right. And where I think it's important to also ask yourself and analyze where things are coming from, because that was the thing I picked up on really quickly, was the timing. And a lot of people on all sides of the argument were very much fueled by how they felt about what had happened in Charlottesville still. So they hadn't taken the time they were kind of rolling the roller coaster of events from that. And I think that then it's hard to be mindful, because you're being driven by your emotions and
Right.
not taking the time to analyze. And it's a balance, right? It's not about, well, suppress your emotions and that you're better to be intellectual. It's about balancing those two things, because when you're in balance is when you see things,
Mm-hmm.
I think, the most clearly. If you take the emotion completely out of it, you just have this analytical idea, and you're attached to numbers and statistics, but they don't mean anything.
Right.
And then if you're just emotion, then you don't see things outside of what you're feeling. So the balance is very important.
Yeah, yeah, that balance is important, because I think when you're reactive. I think what it was sounding like when I was talking about the timing and how soon it was that, yeah, people were still very emotionally vulnerable, still
Mm-hmm.
very raw. So it was like still kind of, it's still an open wound. And so when there's an open wound, we're going to be much more triggered by it. Things are going to affect us more. And so even just having that self-awareness to kind of know right now, I'm very vulnerable with this. So maybe I don't need to watch something that's going to have satire. Maybe I can
Right.
skip SNL this week because I'm in a place where this is really emotionally um, consuming for me right now, and I need to do something with this energy and not ignore it, but also not fuel it in a way that's not helpful, and so
Right.
recognizing, okay, there's something else to do, but having that mindfulness to be able to find your own balance.
And I think also the last thing I want to say about it, um, in context of mindfulness, is I don't know how I want to word this. It's okay for people to have a different emotion or need to be at a different place or digest things differently than you do.
Oh yeah.
Because I think a lot of what I saw around it too were people were angry that other people didn't have their reaction to it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So one, and if we're gonna make it about two sides, which there were many parts of this argument, and they were very the thing I did like about it is I did feel like people were really trying to articulate uh, how they were feeling about it. It's just then there wasn't the the taking in of mindful information. But
Right.
I think too is it's okay. I mean, we have so much media. We have access to so much with the internet and social media that I think we need to accept more that people are wired differently and are receptive to different things. And just because the skit relieved some anger or some anxiety in one person, uh, doesn't mean that, and it didn't in you, or vice versa, uh, doesn't mean that the other person is against you or in the wrong. Like you
Right.
can look. I think that's a dangerous place to be because then we're just constantly in a state of being uh, uh, angry at and I think the thing that was kind of upsetting about it for me was the arguments were mostly among that I was seeing were mostly among allies and people who are really fighting for the same thing at the end of the day. And again, I think the conversation is important to have. I just think it would be much more productive if it stayed mindful,
Right.
specifically with people who are trying to work towards the same goal.
Same goal. Yeah. Yeah. Well, this was helpful for me.
Yes.
getting getting an opportunity to mindfully talk about some of these things that have been swirling around in my mind for the last week and a half. So
Right. Yeah, it was nice because we didn't plan a specific topic. We were just kind of like, well, let's just wing it with current events, and I think that's just where we needed to be. But
yeah,
yeah, it was nice to not to have to analyze things, I guess, in the moment as opposed to when we have a topic and we think about it for a couple days and how we're feeling about it.
yeah,
Because we really try to be mindful and to separate ourselves for a bit before we do um, an episode about it, which is why we tend to be like 3, 4 a week after the event where we're talking about,
right.
because we like it to come down and to kind of see it from both perspectives, all the perspectives that are happening.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's important for me, I think for both of us to be able to kind of come to it from a mindful perspective ourselves. And so it takes, a little bit of time to kind of digest how we feel about it and then be able to step outside of that and look at other perspectives. So, yeah.
Hmm.
All right. Well, I don't know if we have homework this week or we just want people to just kind of check in and let us know how they're kind of coping or what's been on their mind with current events. I don't know.
Right. I do have homework.
You
My
do?
assignment, yeah. I would like everyone to just consciously take an hour, 20 minutes a day, 10 minutes a day to really consciously find something that inspires them, whether that's listening to music that inspires them, finding videos online, articles, whatever it is, but really focus on finding po- things you find positive and inspiring. And I can give context for this because I've realized that it's interesting because I know exactly where to go to find things that inspire me and make me feel aligned and make me feel good. And I so often make the choice to go observe things that do the exact opposite
Mm-hmm.
instead of that. And I think it's important to do that sometimes and
Mm-hmm.
not just kind of be in your bubble of what makes you feel good.
Right.
But I think it's important to bring that into our conscious. So we're making a conscious choice of when we are practicing self care versus when we are trying to engage in things that we're not necessarily in alignment with where we're at.
Yeah. Great. I like that. That's perfect. And I'm definitely going to do that myself this week.
Me too.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll see everybody next week.
All right. Thanks, guys. See you next
Have a
week.
good one.